Hey everyone. Okay, so gonna talk about something a little bit that's kind of been sitting on my head for a little while, and I'm gonna ask a simple question. Um, what would a technologist ideology accomplish? So, I have to start off by kind of explaining like why I started to think about a technology as a core focus of an ideology. Um, well, it kind of all started recently, actually, when I started to notice that a lot of people are seeing, well, we're basically seeing worldwide a sort of populism on the rise, and um, basically conservatism just taking over, not just in America, but all over the place, and it seems to be happening for good reason. People are asking right now, like, will the left ever recover? And I don't see it happening anytime soon. At least in terms of just anything I could think of, uh, who could be even a leader in a Democrat Party, for example, and you have different factions that are rising up, the Justice Democrats and blah blah blah. At this point in time, I still have no idea in my head what would make the most sense because so far every one of them seem to be just doing the same thing over again. But this time will be more pure. It's like a Scotsman fallacy that hasn't happened yet. And I can tell you right now, Antifa is a dead end. Nothing more shows just how much Antifa would be a dead end than that one time where the girl with the Make Bitcoin Great Again hat was pepper sprayed. To me, when I saw her being pepper sprayed by Antifa, and this was at the Berkeley riots, uh, that to me right there represented the pinnacle of the failures of Antifa as a movement. It was more symbolic than anything. I mean, the guy who pepper sprayed her obviously wasn't looking at her hat. He just saw what looked like was possibly a Trump hat. But in a way that kind of adds to it. To me, that adds like an extra cherry on top. The guy was unwilling or incapable of reading the fucking hat before he decided to spray her. And then Antifa went off and commenced to destroy ATMs and break windows. But if you ask me, Bitcoin would be far, far more disruptive towards the banking establishment than destroying some ATMs and windows. Um, it almost seemed like here's a bunch of fake people pretending to be true revolutionaries, and then unnoticing, unwillingly, stupidly, and belligerently attacking someone who is by all means doing a far better job just by wearing a hat that promotes the destruction of, or the dismantling, or the disruption of the banking establishment. I once I saw that, I started to think. I think it's very possible that the new and reformed left party might need to be some form of a technologist ideology. I mean, here we are looking at a group like Antifa, and they're basically, let's be honest, they're probably one of the most justified bullet sponges to step on American soil since the Revolutionary War, the British during the Revolutionary War. I mean, I do feel it's just cancer. It's cancer in every way. But what are they trying to accomplish? Technology. uh, kind of already goes in that direction. And many of our smartest minds who discuss these topics um, seem to be off in La La Land. There seems to be three different breeds of these types of people. Let me show you. One person that I listen to fairly often is this guy here. He's Stefan Molyneux. I just wanted to show a picture so you can see some context. He does a lot of good stuff. He says some things that I disagree with, but for the most part, I always find what he has to say very interesting, and he does a really fantastic job of bringing forth arguments that are compelling, and I think that's invaluable, even if I disagree with something that he says. Well, he's sort of like an example of somebody that when I hear him talk, he's really intelligent, but he has this sort of historian's lens. And if you listen to him talk in his videos on YouTube, he can break down the entirety of the Roman Empire, and I found that episode very interesting. It was just just blow for blow, like this 3 hour fucking video just talking about the Roman Empire, and it was fascinating. But at the same time, he has uh, he has a serious blind spot when it comes to any form of technology. Uh, he he I kind of actually think that he would refer to just about every video game ever made as a Nintendo. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. You'll say that people who sit down in front of computers are missing the point of life. He has absolutely no understanding of that way of life, or how sometimes people can live almost entirely on the internet. Oh, but it's unhealthy. Yes, but it's a culture. It's a different culture. It's a different way of existence. Uh, and he's also very much he views like socialism as being like this thing, like so that, you know, he's the kind of person who has a very 2020 hindsight. He knows what's going on in the past, but he has a hard time looking into the future. And I'm not really sure if there would be any short clips that I can play that really show this to any real extent. But let's just go ahead and leave it at he probably refers to every single video game ever made as a Nintendo. I think that's probably all I needed to say. So here's an example of another really smart guy, Sam Harris, who's, you know, I can't even criticize, but uh, listen to this.
People who are curing blindness in mice to
Now wait, this is a clip from an interview with a person by the name of Kate Darling, who is a leading expert in robot ethics. To me, robot ethics just well, why are these really smart people? I don't fucking get this. It seems like gobbledygook, like that doesn't even make any sense. But and of course the other thing that immediately jumps out as well. I already made a video regarding this topic before, but you know, it's like we're talking about robots. All right, automatically let's get right to the bipedal. What is it like to be human? Like, so it's interesting. So let's listen to Sam Harris talk with Kate Darling for a moment.
artists and designers. It's really a mishmash of all sorts of very interesting people working in fields that aren't don't really fit into the traditional categories of academia that we have right now.
And so now your main interest with robots is in how our relating to them could well and may, in fact, inevitably change the way we relate to other human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally fascinated by the way that we treat robots like they're alive, even though we know that they're not, and the implications that that might have for our behavior.
I must
Well, Google actually takes advantage of this with their cars. They make their cars look cute so that people are less likely to vandalize them. Just a side note, anyway.
Say I'm kind of late to acquire this interest. Obviously, I've seen robots in science fiction for as long as I've seen science fiction, but it wasn't until watching Westworld, literally a couple of months ago, that I
Seriously? uh, See, here's another incredibly well-read mind. This person is extremely intelligent, well-spoken, amazing debating, and everything like that, right? I don't think this guy can install RAM on his desktop. Just saying.
realized that the coming changes in our society based on whatever robots we develop are going to be far more interesting and ethically pressing than I realized. And this has actually nothing to do with what I thought was the central question, which is, will these robots be conscious? That is obviously a hugely important question, and a lot turns ethically on whether we build robot slaves that are conscious and can suffer. But even short of that, we have some really interesting things that will happen once we build robots that escape the what's now called the uncanny valley. This
Okay, we don't even need to discuss the uncanny valley. What he's talking about here is bullshit. It'll never. It'll happen down the road, sure, but they're not going to be conscious. They're not going to be conscious. Uh, a little bit further in, I'll see if I can catch that part as well. But he actually sort of talks about this like um like we don't even know for sure if these things are living. Like, and then there's ethics of robots, and oh man, come on, these things are not fetuses. Like, it does the technology support a sentient mind or not? That's not how a neural network works. Neural networks can do an awful lot. They can accomplish things that the human mind has a hard time with. And that's just a difference in uh, the binary structure of a computer versus how the human brain's organic uh, neural network actually functions. It's just different methods to the same thing. But to immediately assume that when you create a robot, it's suddenly going to be conscious, it's it doesn't make any sense. It's just not going to happen. Like, it's not even a thing to be talking about. We should be talking about what these machines are capable of, not whether or not they're going to have feelings. Uh,
I'll probably have you
Let them
talk
go.
about what the uncanny valley is. And
The uncanny valley is when you make something either digital or not that's just realistic enough that it it starts to look creepy to people because it doesn't have all of the same ticks that a biological person would have. Like, you look at the eyes, you kind of stare through. It doesn't, your brain picks up on all these things because we're very attuned to our ability to like read people's minds. Like, if you play poker, people have to hide how their facial reactions are because as people, we're so attuned to how we're able to read each other that people have to actually adapt these like strategies so that other people can't basically cold read their minds.
I think even based on some of your work, you don't even have to get all the way out of the uncanny valley or even into it for there to be some ethics.
All right, there's really so that's basically this is number two. So you have Stefan Molyneux and you have somebody like Sam Harris who's like, I watched movies in the 80s and uh, you know this is the best we have. This is the best that humanity has at its disposal at the moment. Okay, maybe there's better. If somebody knows better, just let me know. Then then of course we have the third kind, people who really know their shit. But these people are usually already working for some kind of mega corporation, Google, and they're doing these things and toiling away at God knows what. Okay, I mean, it's entirely possible that somebody has already created an AI that is capable of being at least as complex as a small creature or something like that, or I don't know. It's possible what's going on behind the scenes is way worse than what we know now. I know that one of the main topics when it comes to discussion of AI is this idea that, well, it almost sounds like whenever I listen to somebody talk about the topic, they act like AI is just going to happen. And that's one of the things. That's one of the things that Sam Harris just did right there. He's like, is number five, the robot from the movie number five alive? Is he going to get struck by lightning one day and suddenly come to life, and then start laughing at jokes? To me, it's complete nonsense. It doesn't even make sense to talk about it, and to talk about the ethics of robots as well. It just uh, they do everything we want, so they will by extension be just as ethical as humans. Period. And I'll hear people like, "Oh, Asimov's law." Yeah, ain't gonna happen. They're an extension of human beings. They're gonna do everything that human beings want them to do. They're already out there killing people with drones, fully unmanned, fully automated, and they're dumb as rocks, but they're really good at bombing. Just like a self-driving car is dumb as a rock, but it knows how to stop at a stop sign. So we have these three different categories of people, right? So where does that leave us now? Like us. I'm talking about everybody else. You have you have your really great minds who will sometimes tell you to go to the library to learn, you know, Dewey Decimal System or something like that, like Stefan Molyneux. That was his advice. He's like, whoa, time to go to the library. He actually says this, like when talking about the Berkeley riots. Stefan Molyneux suggested that you go to the library to to learn, or you have somebody like Sam Harris who is super smart, doesn't know about the topic, hasn't even heard the Uncanny Valley before, or is he just not? And then you have people who know their shit but aren't talking to anybody because they already work for someone. They're probably under contractual law to not say what they're working on, and the stuff that they are releasing. Google release open source software and stuff like that for AI, and who knows what's going on behind the scenes. So that leaves us with what? I think that pretty much means that all of us are standing around with our collective dicks in our hands, waiting for a mega conglomeration to do something, a, a, a mega corporation to do something that's going to make a difference. So, so with that, so with that in mind, uh, you probably think, well, corporations are capitalistic, and well, they're not necessarily. As if once they start having monopolies, you're not really dealing with a free market. And I don't know at what point capitalism stops being capitalism. But there's a certain point where it's just like the corporations own everything, including the government. Um, and now we're pretty much at the mercy of them as far as any type of artificial intelligence, any type of high-end technology. So you're probably thinking, well, capitalism will fix it all. That'll be something that Stefan Molyneux would probably say. He would say, capitalism will fix it all. I got bad news. Um, I would normally like to say that technology would fix it all, but we're at a point right now where there's a bit of a crossroads because I'm noticing that there are certain aspects of technology that simply don't mesh with capitalism anymore. One of the first things is open source software. I remember a while back when I was trying to search for version control software for projects that I've been working on in the past because I wanted to be able to coordinate with other people And it was usually always just like modding community type stuff, modding communities for video games. Like at the time, it was Fallout New Vegas, or just make something in the Unreal 3 engine once it was released for free, so that people can do whatever they want. Um, Google, I remember finding out that there was a version control software that I can use that was open source, and then I realized, wait, one of the conditions of open source software, uh, or this version control thing, is that everything that I work on has to be open source. In other words, I'm not really allowed to sell it unless I include the source code, so that anybody else can take anything that I already did and build their own thing off of it for the same reasons. So you can technically sell it, but you won't be able to ever control it. Um, Now, I'm not really sure how to rationalize that, but when I first found out about that, it felt like a kick in the nuts. I was like, doesn't this kind of fly in the face of incentivizing me to work harder? Doesn't this kind of fly in the face of capitalism in general? I mean, maybe it doesn't, but I wouldn't be able to control all of the stuff that I worked on. People would be able to access it. Well, there's actually a lot of things, and not all of them, and quite a few different fields, from artificial intelligence, computer-aided design, simulations. There's lots of stuff here. Linux is an open source operating system. Why has Linux had trouble out competing Windows? Well, capitalism doesn't incentivize you to work on Linux. There's much more money for people who are capable of doing that kind of stuff to get a job at Microsoft and work on Windows. I mean, that's an overly simple example of this topic, but just look at all this stuff. All right, there's just so many things that are open source, and if you work on these things, you have to provide the source control, or you have to provide the source. So basically, you do this. The freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose is freedom 0. This is back as far as 1996. The freedom to study how the program works and change it does your computing as you wish. Probably not reading this correctly because I'm kind of just skimming over it, but the freedom to redistribute copies so you can help your neighbor. So ultimately what we're seeing here is, like, can you imagine if Windows was an open source operating system? It was the only one that we had. It was Linux versus Windows, right? Well, who knows what would have came out of that. And one thing that I find that's really weird is that it's this sort of like, it opposes, it it really seriously fucking opposes incentivizing people to do it, to work on it, but yet it's this thing. It's still growing, and it's still getting more and more popular. And as capitalism, or as Windows 10 becomes more and more, uh, I would say, offensive. That's not the best word. I'm trying to think of a good word to describe an operating system that is more intrusive and less of something that you would want to actually own and use. Uh, we end up forcing ourselves to use this horrible thing rather than this really good thing, simply because capitalism isn't actually leading us down the right path. Do you see? So there's this weird window where we're actually getting to see what happens when technology is no longer, it doesn't complement capitalism anymore. They don't go together. There's a failure. There's a disconnect. That if capitalism really was the answer to all high-end technology, then Linux would be a truly competitive operating system against Windows right now. Now there are also examples such as 3D printers. At first, 3D printers sound fantastic. The capitalism and 3D printers are going to go hand in hand, right? Right? Still waiting. No, it's entirely antithetical to what somebody who would want to corner a market or hold a monopoly would ever want. In fact, 3D printers really fuck with things in ways that a capitalistic a society that depends on capitalism would just can't handle. Say you're a gun manufacturer and somebody starts selling 3D printers in that state that you're selling these guns, and then all of a sudden somebody fucking starts making guns. People are actually 3D printing guns. Now what the fuck do you do about that? Now in the case of the government actually taking, you know, the government's not going to be too happy with that either. These are unregistered weapons you can't even do anything about. And who knows who the fuck can do them? And as 3D printers continue to get better and better, so not only is capitalism an affront, and not only is our 3D printers an affront to capitalism, but they're also an affront to the government. They're an affront to anything. Honestly, they're an affront to any kind of hierarchy in society. Oh, but capitalism will solve it all, huh? It's totally the answer. No, in this particular case, what we're going to see is capitalism not really pushing 3D printers quite so hard. Maybe a little bit, just a bit, but nah. It'll be like Linux. It'll be like Linux. We really, really, really want you to depend on uh, our factories to produce your goods. That's what they're going to say, and that's probably what they will be pushing for. And then there's a lesser example. Another example would be solar panels. Well, there's actually examples of this where it's like, well, that's fantastic. I just buy the solar panels and then I no longer have to pay for electricity. Well, not yet. The technology still has a ways to go. But like I always say, an argument against the advancement of technology is a pessimist's point of view. You're going to lose the fight eventually. Anytime you argue against technology getting better, unless you are the one literally putting your foot down to make sure that it kind of stays where it's at, you really don't have an argument. The only means that you can win that argument is through subversion or tactics of some sort. I mean, they call these technologies disruptive technologies for a reason. I like the term high technology, not disruptive. Like if you were to look at in terms of an ideology, you wouldn't want to refer to your core tenet. Your core tenet is something that would be a pejorative of some sort, disruptive. Um, that's just me. I and of course, last but not least, there's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just one type of what is called a cryptocurrency, which is internet money. Um, Somebody figured out, an unknown individual or group of people figured out how to make uh, uh, a ledger of limited resource that is hopelessly complicated to a point where the average human being is probably never going to understand how this shit works. I can't understand every aspect of Bitcoin myself, and I'm paying attention to it. But um, I mean, it basically marks the collapse of fiat. I mentioned this earlier. Now, nobody controls the flow of money, and collecting taxes, I mean, it's a complete joke at this point. Like, say if you were to have a society where everybody just decides one day that they're just going to fucking adopt a cryptocurrency. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin. It could be anything. It could be anything. That's the other thing too. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be Bitcoin. You're not limited to that. You want to know why? Bitcoin is open source. It's open source. It's one of the fucking open source things. We're back at this shit again. So I mean, one of the main things about software that we know of right now is that it goes against uh, limitations. You can copy a song a billion times, and since it's a digital project, it'll probably never degrade. I mean, it's probably going to be one to one forever, pretty much. But Bitcoin is actually a way to attach a serial number to that song, and now that song will always be its own entity, if you want to describe it as that. And that's how they actually manage to get money. Um, but it's not just limited to money. It can be a lot of stuff. So I mean, I just I personally I like after cracking down on Bitcoin, the government will have a lot of interesting problems crop up. Like some kid playing World of Warcraft one day gets an item that's worth a couple bitcoins of money. Oh, he's 18? Well, he's got to pay taxes on that. Um, the reason why I find this amusing is that someday the military industrial complex will be in part powered by swords from World of Warcraft or some equivalent. So this is why I so this is why I think that um, like if the government and the elites really knew where the internet was going, you know, back in the 90s, if they knew where things would go, they would have snuffed the internet out. I'm pretty sure of it because the internet in and of itself is another disruptive technology. It's been pretty disruptive. I mean, I don't know. It's not just disruptive in terms of the collapse of, you know, it's not just in terms of like disruptive in terms of capitalism, but it also it's causing the collapse of the legacy media. But there's also other dangers as well, unknowns such as like who was expecting social media to be so dangerous? Nobody ever once thought that a poorly designed social media page would eventually become a fringe ideological breeding ground, which to me is just yeah. Who would have ever expected that poor UX design choices might one day lead to civil unrest? Twitter, should we scrap Facebook because it was designed to become an echo chamber? I mean, I don't think we should scrap Facebook. I think that if we really wanted to, what we would do is we would create a page that usurps information from Facebook in a way that is undetectable and allows us to store that information in a way that to our own likings, so we can look at our friends' posts without having to deal with their filtering systems. This is disruptive technology that doesn't exist. There's a disruptive technology that doesn't exist. Sorry, I'll learn how to speak one of these days. There's a disruptive technology that doesn't exist yet, and I've thought about it for quite some time. But basically, you have a bot load up a web page, have the bot look for specific things, have the bot do it in a way that is undetectable, usurp information from the page without the user ever having to even lay eyes on it directly, and then post that information in a database, a local database. So I could theoretically have one application that I run that allows me to have full access of every single social media page at the exact same time without having to view ads, and unless I want to. And there's really nothing anybody can do about it. It's another disruptive thing. I mean, you're given information off of a web browser, but there's absolutely no control over how you use that information. They don't have control over that. I'm pretty sure in the case of Windows 10 they would, maybe, but even then it's a stretch. So um, yeah, you don't have to use the page the way they want you to use the page, and that would be yet another thing. And I'm sure that would end up being an open source program. Uh-oh. Yeah, it's completely it goes against everything as far as the current establishment, economics, and everything. So that pretty much brings us right back to the original thing, my original point, or the point of making the video in the first place. A technologist ideology could be very powerful. It could be a very powerful reform of liberal values. Um, so I mean, let's just look at. I mean, I guess if I'm going to talk about this, I might as well like say what an ideology is in the first place. I mean, it's simple enough to just grab this and at its base thing is a collection of beliefs held by an individual, group, or society. One of the things that stands out whenever I see an ideology, though, just isn't just the ideology itself, but something that usually comes with it is virtue signaling. And I think that really brings to the correct point, is that virtue signaling is is a conspicuous expression of moral values by an individual done primarily with the intent of enhancing that person's standing within a social group. See, I think that right there is actually the meat of why exactly a technologist ideology would be beneficial. Now, virtue signaling is usually used as a pejorative because it's sort of a like, hey, it's it's usually bad because it's signaling something that's untrue. It's usually bad because it's like somebody pretending that they like, if you see somebody who's like, oh, I totally care about poor people, and that person literally doesn't fucking care about poor people at all, but made this one like donation or something like that, and suddenly starts like holding it up to high regards, and that's why it would be a negative term, and I can understand that. But one thing that I like when it comes to a technologist style ideology type of virtual signaling is that it sort of creates an arms race with something that's actually um, that actually exists, the tangible a tangible arms race. When you virtue signal in terms of like how badass your car is, you fucking put an 8-cylinder engine in it. You make that motherfucker squeal when you press the gas down, right? You make a car that can beat other cars in races. When you have virtue signaling when it comes to things that are tangible, it's a very very different beast, and that's not really described right here. And you'll see like a technologist sort of ideology. Like if you might be familiar with the PC Master Race on Reddit. I know it's a terrible name. If you have never heard of it before, Master Race probably immediately triggers you. Oh God! Uh, but but basically, it's just a bunch of people who say that PC is the way to play your games. That it's an objectively better uh, way tool for gaming, and I agree with it. It's absolutely it is. It's an objectively better thing for high resolution. You can upgrade your computer in ways that are not before, and for a really long time before consoles became really powerful, capitalism helped the game industry flourish. This is yet another example where capitalism slows down progress. Then what ended up happening was people realized that consoles were more profitable and easier to work on. So then you saw a diminishing of progress in terms of technology so that people can make games for a console. And you literally, there was a point in time where if your computer was more than 1 year old, the damn thing was ancient and you had to upgrade it. Like, I'm not fucking around. You at least had to get a new video card because some new game comes out and you had to get a new video card for that fucking game. There was a point in time where it was like when Quake came out and then Quake 2, it was like there was just a stretch of time where it was just every fucking game meant you need a new video card or more RAM or whatever. Like, we were upgrading constantly every 6 fucking months. But once consoles took over, that shit stopped. And I mean, maybe there were other market factors involved, but it's just so much easier to deal with that. But it's also far more profitable for everybody because more people can use consoles and everything like that. It was just more economically sound to work with consoles than it was to actually keep going and pushing. Because I guarantee you right now that in video games, if we had never had consoles, the games that we see now, we would be much further. We would be so much fucking further. If that never stopped, we'd be rocking fucking full ray tracing 3D engines. Like, it would be unfucking believable. But it had to slow down, and it happened because capitalism and technology, after they start off loving each other, and then they start to fall apart. And it seems to happen fairly often, where the progress of one doesn't mean the progress of the other, and they just stop being friends. If a technologist ideology were to become a competition to see who is the most advanced, it would quite possibly push high technology past the tipping point. Disruptive technology or high technology would then become available to an ever increasing number of people because there would be a reason for it. There would be people who are circling around this not because of economic incentive, but because of virtue signaling incentive. In other words, this might be the thing that would push people. It would just so happen that if you look at disruptive technology as a means to an end, disruptive technology makes the current economic system unsustainable. You would force economic change from the bottom up rather than wait for the corporations to have a chance to implement their own ideas first. So if capitalism doesn't push solar panels and 3D printing and Linux and all of these things that are open source like Bitcoin and everything, if capitalism is no longer doing the job of progressing technology, then an ideology would do the job. And it would be what a lot of left leaning people are looking for at the moment. That's a technologist ideology would, could actually even become a political party. I'm not kidding. Like, literally, like, have somebody who is utilizing high technology, a social media skew that nobody has access to, the ability to basically take any old guard media, any old elitist banking establishment, and put them in a very, very disrupted state while you simply just roll over them with advanced technology that they didn't have in the first place because you pushed it. it would be very hard to deal with. In fact, it would place conservatism in a very unique situation because there's no room for keeping things the way they were, as everybody adopts it. The next generation of kids, they're gonna want the cool toys. They're gonna want the new stuff. You can't stop them. All you gotta do is attach a cool video game to it, or fucking make it so that you can watch PewDiePie on it, and you're done. And that's it. You have you have a disruptive technology. I'm not exactly sure how it would. I'm not exactly sure how it would play out, but yeah, I think that actually would be one way that the reform of liberalism could actually work. It does everything that we want. It pushes progress. I mean, imagine if Linux was launched to being the #1 operating system. Technologists would push for this. Reliable banking through cryptocurrency and a true free market with no restrictions, no borders. Technologists would push for this. A universal basic income, if the government even manages to stand. I'm pretty sure the government would find ways to to adapt, because with a political party, that's basically what you would be doing. Um, Technologists would push for this. More control over politicians and politics in general. Technologists obviously can definitely push for that. An ever increasing number of open source programs and utilities. It's already happening right now. I mean, if it were an ideology where somebody can like brag about how how altruistic they are, if I can pronounce that correctly, by by saying they built robots for some kids that were trying to start a fucking lemonade stand or something. Or maybe one day just like show up to the fucking McDonald's and show people how to fucking use a robot, like donate a robot to all the employees so that the employees can sit on their thumbs while the robots do the job. I know I'm making the mistake that robots, I'm making the robots straw man, but I mean, literally, like imagine if somebody were to do that, it would end up on the alt media. The legacy media would probably have a shit fit. Oh my God, this can't be allowed. Blah blah blah. You know these luddites are gonna fucking complain if the legacy media is even still standing by then. All right, so I'm gonna end it here. I know this is probably a pretty long video, and I probably talked your ear off about it. It's just I'm glad that I finally fucking. This was another thing that I needed to get off my chest. There was this straw man of like artificial intelligence, and this is another thing that was just bugging me for ages. Like, and I finally got this just got to mention it. So let me know what you think in the comments section. Um, like it uh, if you watched it to the end. I'm sorry if this video is too long. And stay tuned for more. I plan to do more things like this.